a world where nuclear war has begun, vampires fought back in super real 3D.
The testing continues with the Canon EOS R5 C, and somebody threw up on a comment that they'd love to see some comparisons with the 4K 120p and 3K RAW 120p. And what was funny about that comment was I didn't even think about the idea that it had 3K 120p, but it does, and in RAW, and that is super interesting to me. I was like, that's a great idea, I'll absolutely do that. So I just put out a video just testing like almost exclusively the Slowmo in 120p, and it's in 4K and it's in 3K, and then I accidentally put it in 2K. Actually, when I went to grade that, color grade that, I didn't even realize that it was HD until I was like kind of nestled into a grade that I was like, that looks good. And I was like, wait, why is the frame size? And then I realized, oh, this is only 2K? And when I was looking at the quality of the 2K, it kind of blew me away. I mean, it's like, that is absolutely an option as well. And the data rate is gonna be amazing in comparison. So you can film a ton of 120p footage on this camera. There's trade-offs when it comes to the 3K RAW versus the 4K XF-AVC, because those are the two options that you have. You're either going to film in a 10-bit compressed format that's very high quality and downsampled from the 8K sensor, or you can film in the 3K RAW and then you're going to have 12-bit. And then the question mark is, how much better is the color? And also, is it sharper? Canon in general is kind of known for having a bit of a softer image, and I've pointed out that with this camera, I feel like that is just not the case because of the 8K sensor. All the footage looks really, really sharp out of the gate. It's the sharpest Canon camera that I've worked with as far as just right out of the box. And then if you add sharpening to it, it's pretty impressive. So with Canon cameras, it's notoriously soft, but on top of that, with 120 frames per second, people have in particular pointed out how soft that is, and it's better or worse on particular camera models. The 120p on the EOS R5 C has been a little bit criticized, and I gotta say, after testing, it's actually really good. I don't have any issue with it. I think that it actually grades out fine. It does look a little bit softer out of the gate, but in a way, I don't know how much of that is because I've gotten used to how sharp the image is when I'm filming in normal frame rates on the camera. When you go to a 120 frame per second, you're gonna actually increase your shutter speed quite a bit. Now, by default, it puts it in 120. I put my shutter speed at 240. Now that's going to let in a lot less light. So you're going to need a lot more light. If you're not familiar with slow-mo, the higher the frame rate, the higher the shutter speed, the more light you need. Oftentimes you're going to fall on filming a lot of slow-mo outside more than inside. You absolutely need to have high quality lights if you are filming indoors for slow-mo. That's just a must, because the refresh rate of low quality lights is that you will experience seeing the flicker, and you don't want flicker. So with high quality lights, actual film lights, I use all LEDs at this point, you know, there is no flicker, and so you're not going to have that issue, but you do have to still provide a tremendous amount more light than you normally would. I'm still having some a reality check on the capabilities of the monitor on the back of the EOS R5 C. I feel like this is possibly the weakest point in the camera that I've experienced so far. I love all the functionality of it, but I'm still having a hard time getting proper exposure. Now, I know that there's exposure tools, and I am using those, but in a bright sun environment, it's just a little bit challenging on the go to get it exactly dialed in when you have all of the, for instance, the waveform monitor up. Where it places itself is stuck. You cannot move it, and it can really affect the idea of the composition of the shot, and it can affect focus. If the person ends up being behind the waveform monitor with their face, now I can't see the focus point that I'm trying to do, and I do like using manual lenses quite a bit. So that's been an issue. So then I end up turning it off, and then I am judging it by eye, and in a bright lit environment outside, it's just not that bright of a screen. The sharpness of it, I'm having a hard time with the focus a bit, because even with the focus assist on, that does help a lot, but there's still play in the exact focus. If you're going for super shallow depth of field, the focus peaking, it is effective. It's not a criticism on Canon's focus peaking. It's just something I've experienced with focus peaking in general. I oftentimes am capable of pulling a sharper shot off with my eye because it'll want to sit. It's not the exact focal plane that I want it to hit, and I can tell by my eye if the monitor is sharp enough, and it is just simply not the case with this monitor that's on the back. So I think that's the next thing I'm going to invest in. Now, I mention all that because you're trying to pull a proper exposure with this 120 frames per second. I underexposed on a few shots, right? And on the RAW, that definitely happens. So it's been pointed out, yes, the RAW is noisier than the 4K XF-AVC. That is a given, but it's kind of exaggerated a little bit in some of the shots where I did underexposed. It just happened to be the reality of filming with it for the first time and running into some of the little issues that I talked about with, wanting to get rid of the waveform monitor for a moment so I could pull accurate focus on certain things. Some of it's user error, but without doubt, it is a little bit noisier. How much it can clean up? It cleans up pretty good, but I do think that in general, I would err on the side of overexposing slightly when I'm filming at these higher frame rates. Just that's going to be a little bit safer, especially if I'm going in RAW. So I'm going to err on the side of overexposed now for the RAW. I've been trained to not overexpose when using Canon cameras because of the highlight, the dynamic range being somewhat limited. The Canon cameras haven't always had the most dynamic range, but they've really gotten it there at this point, I think. The biggest step forward being when they introduced the C300 Mark III and the DGO sensor, which does a dual gain output, a shot that is recording with the proper exposure for the noise floor on the shadows, and then a proper one for highlight roll-off, and then it combines those images into a single image. And that DGO sensor is very attractive, and they did put that in to the Canon C70, which has always made me be very interested in that camera. However, I ended up going with the R5 C for many reasons that I've mentioned in other videos, and the bottom line is that I just think the image is actually better. And then now in my current test with this camera and dynamic range, I'm continually blown away at actually how much dynamic range I can pull out of it once I get it in post. And it even competing with the red, and I did a video about that. You can check that out if you want. It was a real rough and dirty test, but still the results kind of really surprised me. With that being said, in the dynamic range aspect of this camera, you can actually err on the side of overexposing a little bit, which is, again, a first-time experience for me with Canon. So I think that's something to do. I would recommend that if you're filming in a higher frame rate and you have to crank up your shutter speed. Okay, so the sharpness is a little bit better in the RAW, the color is a little bit better in the RAW. Another part that will completely dictate whether you want to use this or not, and it's very interesting to me, is that you can, with the 3K RAW, the only way to achieve that is that you're going to have to put it into a Super 16 crop mode, which is already going to put you in this spot where it's like you're so zoomed in. And this is a pro and a con. It's a con if you're in a small room and you're trying to use a longer lens, but it's a pro if you're outside and you are trying to capture something from far away. When I'm filming with a 70 to 200 millimeter lens, it just normally doesn't have that reach. However, if you put it in 4K, then you can go back to your full frame and then you get this wide ability to still use a long lens like that. So you get the long lens feel, but a wider field of view. So the bottom line is that in that regard, I would say the camera just has so many options. And in sniper mode, it's kind of hard. It makes me kind of already want to gravitate towards using the RAW. The Red Epic Dragon offers 120 frames per second in 4K. It is super cropped in as well. So you're kind of in that boat. At least with this camera, you actually have that 120 frames per second in a full frame mode, which is glorious and really useful for a lot of different situations. So you have that amazing option. However, let's talk about the quality. So when I do it on the Red, the compression rate that it automatically puts me at is a 12:1 compression. This is not the best compression. This is not the highest quality. There's definitely the introduction of some, it's softer a bit, it can be a lot noisier, so I'm familiar with all this. That can definitely happen on the Red as well, and it's a compromise that I've accepted when going to 120 frames per second. When I hop over to 120 frames per second on here and thinking about the comparison, it's extremely competitive, and in some cases it outperforms it. Part of it being because it is a better low light camera. Right out of the gate, I'm going to get a lot more shots that are usable at 120 frames per second. And as far as the compression value, I don't know, it's kind of interesting. I've got to do some actual side-by-side tests to know the verdict, but I would say that I've had amazing results with the red at 120 frames per second for certain videos that I've done, and it looks glorious, and I think this can be right there with it, which is just amazing. So, but I will say that the 12-bit has really been, so far, just as flexible as my years of grading the red and pushing colors around. I mean, they have a different quality to them, and they do push and pull a little bit differently from one another, but I'm having a lot of fun pushing around the Canon color, and I would not say that, I mean, it's very interesting to me how little difference there is between 12 and 16-bit with the color. I have noticed the difference between the 10-bit color and the 12-bit color as far as the XF-AVC and the RAW. So the RAW is very, very, very nice in the Canon, and the color is richer in the RAW. So I do like that more. There is a difference there, but from the 12-bit of the Canon versus the 16-bit of the red, it's interesting. But the red just has a certain filmic quality out of the gate that I just cannot deny, and the Canon is just so clean. And I'm playing around with doing some dirtier images, and I'm liking the results. But when I do end up feeling them side by side, if I want to go for the most filmic absolute look that I can get, the red just is immediately there, and the Canon is taking some work to get it there, and I still want to see if I can get to a point where I feel like it officially can sit right there. However, for particular clients where I need it to feel as modern and fresh and cutting edge as possible, I'm actually thinking that I will lean towards the Canon because there's a cleanness that I'm getting out of it that is it's just there out of the gate. And I can get that in the red, but it takes more work. So it's very, very interesting, and it's very fun having both cameras to play with and getting a better sense of what I like and which direction. That's a little bit of a tangent. This whole thing is kind of a tangent. I did not stay talking solely about slow-mo, but this channel is really about talking about cameras, learning about editing, learning about filming. It's not just totally zoned on one camera. And so I think it's fun to compare the evolution of what I've experienced in different cameras, and so we can kind of get more of a conversation going about it, because that's the fun part of this, is getting to kind of talk about cameras in general, sensors, comparisons, brands, where's the color comparisons, the dynamic range, specs that are supposed to be listed, do they really add up in reality when you go to test them? And at the end of the day, I will close this video by talking about the slow-mo one last time and saying that the Canon EOS R5 C is definitely an extremely capable slow-mo camera up to 120 frames per second. The image is still fantastic, and I'm not saying it is the best 120p out there, but the idea that it's packaged into a camera that also offers so many other options that I've been talking about at this price point is insane. I really feel like Canon has finally put out a camera that is not crippled to fit a certain price structure. And that is what the EOS R5 C is, in my opinion. If you want to subscribe and follow along on more tests with the R5 C, that's great. And I hope to catch you on another episode. So take care, guys. Peace.
Movie Voice.